He's been published on a wide array of topics, including politics, religion, golf, and G.K. Chesterton. His insights on Chesterton have been published in several places, including Gilbert Magazine, the official publication of the Society of G.K. Chesterton. And in his spare time, Mr. Howting enjoys reading and thinking about G.K. Chesterton. So, backed by popular acclaim, John Howting, please welcome him.
Thank you. I think speaking here is the highlight of my year. Yeah, the original title was Why Conservatives Must Support Liberal Education, but I modified it to Why Conservatives Must Support Liberal Education. I always like to emphasize the word must, because I argue that if you don't support liberal education, you're not a conservative and you should stop calling yourself that. You look like a doofus calling yourself that if you don't support liberal education. And I hope that by the end of my talk you understand why I say that. And I'd like to explain why it is that conservatives must support liberal education. But in order to do that, I must first say a few things about conservatism. Now that's going to take a few minutes. But I extend to you the same promise that Henry VIII extended to each of his wives. I shan't keep you long. The first major conservative magazine in the United States was National Review. National Review was founded in the mid-1950s by a man named William F. Buckley, Jr. Who here has heard of William F. Buckley, Jr.? Okay, at least one. Now, Mr. Buckley was a witty man with controversial opinions. For instance, Buckley, who was a Latin Mass-going Catholic, defended and praised the Spanish Catholic authoritarian Francisco Franco. And during the AIDS epidemic, Mr. Buckley called for all AIDS patients to be tattooed on the forearm and the buttocks to keep junkies and homosexuals from unknowingly spreading AIDS. A pretty radical policy prescription, no? Buckley died in 2008 when I was in college. I still remember that. He died in 2008, but National Review lives on till this day, although National Review has evolved quite a bit. For instance, David French, a contributing editor to National Review, is perhaps the foremost defender and venerator of the religious neutrality of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Mr. French does not sing the praises of General Franco or any theocratic leader. French readily reminds his readers that he, a practicing lawyer, often relies on First Amendment religious neutrality to defend religious minorities, as well as Christians in their right of free worship. And I think we all know this sort of person. They're always very fond of reminding you that Christ said, "Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, render unto God that which is God's," which is a part of Scripture, a line from Scripture that gets perverted and twisted around into a precept which is now used to render everything to Caesar and nothing to God. But that's a subject for a different talk at a different time, maybe next year. In 2019, this wonderful man, David French, the Solon of conservatism at National Review, defended the right of drag queens to rent private rooms so that they may read books to young children. That is commonly called Drag Queen Story Hour. Mr. French called it a blessing of liberty. He said it's all very American. An entire book could be written on how conservatism evolved from Catholic triumphalism and AIDS tattoos to religious indifference and drag queen celebrations. Conservatism's transitioning, or maybe I should say transing, I think that's the term, that conservatism's transing has at least inspired a whole lot of fighting over the years. In the 90s, that fighting centered around a man named Patrick J. Buchanan, a former White House staffer, political commentator, and presidential candidate. Pat Buchanan ran for president 3 times on a platform intended to conserve the American way of life as he had known it. Buchanan opposed the unrestrained flow of goods and people across America's borders, meaning he favored restricting immigration and trade. Buchanan also opposed American military intervention in the name of spreading American values. Because the American way of life cannot be exported, it is uniquely American. Buchanan's vision of America was of a normal country made up of a people united around shared heroes, holidays, and history. In a word, identity. Buchanan sought to conserve a distinct American identity. We are losing our sense of who we are, Buchanan would often say on the campaign trail. Buchanan's brand of conservatism was not widely accepted by the professional conservative pundit class. Ramesh Ponnuru, the editor of the prestigious Conservative National Review, said that Buchanan was not a true conservative because he valued tribalism over ideas. Quote from Ponnuru, "Conservatives tend to place a lot of emphasis, maybe too much, on the idea that ideas have consequences. They hoist their ideas up the flagpole and then see who salutes. Buchananism puts its idealized social base first and lets it drive everything else. For Pat Buchanan, loyalty to the tribe trumps any idea." Here, Mr. Ponnuru draws a dichotomy between ideas and identity. The true conservative, says Ponnuru, wants to conserve ideas associated with free market capitalism, the system by which we make money. The problem with Buchanan, according to Ponnuru, is that he sacrifices free market ideas to the interests of his tribe and their identity. Capitalism means the free flow of goods and people. By opposing this free flow of goods and people, Buchanan excommunicates himself from conservatism. Of course, Ponnuru was not the only Buchanan critic. There were others. There was one particularly harsh Buchanan critic, a charismatic, well-tanned, real estate mogul billionaire who would become a reality TV star. His name was Donald J. Trump. Now, who here has heard of Donald J. Trump? All right, a few. That's good. Trump briefly competed with Pat Buchanan for the presidential nomination of the nascent Reform Party in the year 2000 during the presidential cycle that year. During this political contest, Trump accused Buchanan of racial bigotry and anti-Semitism. He even called Buchanan a Hitler lover. Several years later, however, Trump would apologize to Buchanan and then adopt Buchanan's positions on pretty much all the major issues, run for president on those positions, and endure the exact same attacks that Buchanan had previously endured. Many of those attacks coming from the prestigious National Review. During Trump's first week in office, Jonah Goldberg, a contributing editor at National Review, wrote the following: "Up until very recently, American exceptionalism, meaning we are a creedal nation dedicated to certain principles reflected in our founding documents, largely defined the conservative understanding of patriotism. Trump, however, sees America more as an identity than an idea." Here again, the dichotomy. Note the dichotomy. Ideas versus identity. According to Jonah Goldberg, a conservative conserves the principles codified in the American Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. So which is it? What does a conservative primarily concern himself with? Ideas or identity? The great Southern conservative Emmy Bradford, an English professor at the University of Dallas, exhorted his readers and students to know who you are. That is the task of the conservative as understood by Bradford. Michael Oakeshott, the English conservative and professor of history at the London School of Economics, wrote in his essay on being conservative that conservatives are not averse to change, but are weary of change because, quote, all change is a threat to identity, and every change is an emblem of extinction. For Oakeshott, identity is composed of associations and property, not mere abstractions. The conservative, according to Oakeshott, notices and appreciates his place in the cosmos. He has attachments to real things and people, and he prefers them to whatever supposed gain may come from radical experimentation, adventuring, or conquest. It is no wonder why nearly all the old heavyweights of the conservative intellectual movement, those who were still alive, supported Pat Buchanan when he ran for president in the early 90s. In fact, Russell Kirk, largely credited for starting the American conservative movement, served as Pat Buchanan's Michigan State campaign chairman. In a press release, Russell Kirk explained that he was backing Buchanan because, quote, Buchanan would discourage indiscriminate immigration into the United States. Kirk elaborated, our country cannot play host to all the world and still maintain its established culture, successful economy, and social cohesion. In an interview with a local reporter following his public endorsement of Buchanan, Kirk and his wife, Annette, would further explain that they were initially drawn to Buchanan because of his opposition to two things: affirmative action programs and liberal immigration policies. Some of Kirk's former students and acolytes were taken aback by their mentor's support for immigration restriction. Just 3 years prior, I think in 1989, in his economics textbook, Kirk had said positive things about immigration, and he appeared to be endorsing a more open immigration policy. Kirk's apparent evolution on this issue explains a lot about the nature of conservatism and the importance of education. Russell Kirk's former research assistant, Wesley McDonald, explained Kirk's apparent evolution on immigration in a talk given at the Philadelphia Society in April of 2005. According to McDonald, Kirk supported immigration with assimilation. Immigrants who came to America and assimilated to the dominant culture were an asset, not a liability. In the early 90s, however, Kirk had become convinced that assimilation was not happening as it once had. One reason, America's public school system no longer fostered assimilation to the dominant culture. Rather, it fostered multiculturalism. In his essay, The Fraud of Multiculturalism, Kirk explains that the proponents of multiculturalism, the multiculturalists, claim that the public school curriculum is far too Western or Eurocentric, that various ethnic groups which have contributed mightily to the American cultural experience have been woefully underrepresented in the curriculum. Kirk notes that school textbooks, at the urging of the multiculturalists, are evolving from tools for instruction into devices for increasing the self-esteem of ethnic groups. Kirk warns that a new brand of ethnic grievance studies combined with technical training were crowding out liberal education, or what we today often call classical education. So you've got the ethnic grievance studies and you've got technical training crowding out classical education. One of the great effects of classical or liberal education is that it instills a sense of Western identity by taking the student through the Western canon and passing along to him the wisdom of the perennial philosophy. What is Western identity, you may ask? Well, there's a prior, broader question. What is Western civilization? And there is no shortage of professional fundraisers in and around the conservative movement asking for money to defend Western civilization. But what is it? We never seem to explain what it is or answer that question or even ask it. Western civilization is languages such as Greek and Latin. It is the great ballads, the great explorers, the discovery and conquering of the new world. It is Holy Scripture. It is Gregorian chant. It is a daily schedule ordered around liturgy with people pausing their work to pray the Angelus at noon. It is the Holy Mass. It is the sacraments. It is a calendar filled with holidays honoring various heroes. It is those heroes. Some became heroic by practicing the cardinal virtues. They are called warriors or knights. Others became heroic by practicing the Christian virtues. They are called saints. Western civilization is stained glass windows honoring those heroes and teaching Bible stories to the poor and illiterate. It is paintings and sculptures. It is art and architecture. Western civilization is composed of a lot of things. My friend Hilaire Belloc famously said, "Europe is the faith is Europe." Belloc elaborates in his editor's preface to the Catholic Philosophy by Father Vincent McNabb, by the way, the aforementioned Vincent McNabb. Belloc writes, "The peculiar function of the Catholic Church in the story of our civilization has been to preserve the philosophic conquests of pagan antiquity and to expand them over an even greater range of discovery than the greatest of the ancients had commanded. There is no one acquainted with the story of Europe who does not know this to be true." The story of Europe, the story of Western civilization, the story of our civilization is the story of Catholics preserving and expanding upon the philosophic conquests of pagan antiquity. By the faith, when Belloc says Europe is the faith is Europe, by the faith, Belloc means two things: the Catholic faith and the wisdom of the perennial philosophy. That is the core of Western civilization. The keeper of the deposit of faith is a divinely protected institution, Holy Mother Church. We have a guarantee from sacred scripture that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. We do not have a similar guarantee. But let me ask you, do we have a similar guarantee in scripture that the wisdom of the perennial philosophy will similarly be protected and handed down to our posterity? Can we make that assumption that it will be handed down? Can we safely assume that future generations will be educated and steeped in the perennial philosophy? No, we can't assume that. As far as I know, we have no similar guarantee in Scripture. Just as we have the church conserving the deposit of faith, I say we need liberal education conserving our inherited wisdom. Here we need to back up a bit and consider our identity, not just as Westerners, but more broadly as men. What is man? Man is a thinker. The object of his thinking is truth. Truth is a correspondence between the mind and reality. It is not a mere idea. An idea is something that exists in the mind, a mental construct, which may or may not correspond with something in extramental reality. The perennial philosophers were not just men who happened to have the right ideas concerning truth. They knew what questions to ask and what distinctions to make to lead others to the truth. Aristotle was not just some guy who had the correct ideas handed to him. Through the intellectual virtue of understanding, he grasped first principles. Then he reasoned from those first principles, what we used to call science, and he arrived at new knowledge. This new knowledge was a better understanding of something that he had noticed before. That is called wisdom, or knowledge of the causes of things, or ultimate reality. A seventh grader notices right triangles. He notices how the A side squared added to the B side squared is equal to the C side squared. He will not, however, understand what causes this until he grasps the first principles of geometry and then reasons step by step, each step following necessarily from the prior, and finally arrives at a conclusion that A squared plus B squared equals C squared. The Pythagorean theorem, which is what I'm talking about, is over 40 individual proofs, together proving that A squared plus B squared necessarily equals C squared. I think I'm about 10 to 12 years older than everybody in this room. Over the next decade of your lives, you're going to learn there really are only two types of men at the end of the day. You got men who study geometry and losers. When the student sees how one proof necessarily follows from the prior and the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises, he knows a more ultimate reality than just A squared plus B squared equals C squared. He knows what causes A squared plus B squared to necessarily equal C squared. The great philosophers of our Western patrimony took a journey that led to truth. A tradition needs to be rooted in truth. If it is not, then it's not going to be passed down for very long. It'll be abandoned. Just as we pass down A squared plus B squared equals C squared because it signifies some truth, so we also pass down material things because they signify some truth. What we call culture is a collection of signs and symbols. And here it might be useful to recall Augustine's definition of a sign, that which strikes the senses and calls to mind something other than itself, not by chance. What we call culture is a collection of signs. They call to mind deeper, more spiritual meanings. They are largely material, but informed by something immaterial. As T.S. Eliot writes in his notes towards a definition of culture, quote, "Culture is the incarnation of religion." That is a great quote. Culture is the incarnation of religion. The signs and symbols comprising our culture call to mind faith and wisdom. We could say they are the incarnation of faith and wisdom. And when we discard those signs and symbols, we begin to forget that faith and that wisdom. We begin to forget who we are, and an identity crisis sets in. The communion rail was a material distinction between clergy and laity. As we discard that material distinction, we begin to forget the immaterial distinction for which it stood. It is no coincidence that as female attire became less distinctly feminine, women began acting more like men, and men began treating them as such. Common sense, warns Chesterton, must be kept as an esoteric secret in the dark temple of culture. That men and women exist and are distinct from one another is indeed a matter of common sense. That may prompt some, even some self-styled conservatives, maybe even some in this room, to regard material signs of male and female distinction as superfluous, mere relics from a bigoted past. And yet when we tear down a culture with all its material signs, we find common sense disturbingly uncommon. The removal of a sign, a cultural symbol, is a public statement that the truth for which the sign stood is now considered taboo. And just as that truth's signage can be expelled from society, so too can anyone who espouses said truth. We expelled the signs of sexual distinction. We are now in the process of expelling the truth of sexual distinction. When we expel a truth about a thing, we replace it with an idea of the thing. As we expel sexual truth, which is based in reality, we replace it with an idea, which is nothing more than a mental construct. In this case, gender, and that's all gender is. It's a mental construct. After adopting the idea, men are habituated to view reality through the lens of this idea. This is called ideological thinking. The man who thinks ideologically is known as an ideologue. The ideologue cares more for ideas than reality. What G.K. Chesterton says of the maniac in his book Orthodoxy is equally true of the ideologue. He is trapped in that clean, well-lit prison of a single idea. The idea always comes before reality. The ideologue unconsciously assumes that everything in the senses originates in the mind. If he is committed to his ideology, he will fail to understand reality. He will even fail to understand an obvious crisis. Think about it. How do you come to know or understand a crisis? To understand the nature of a crisis, a man must first perceive the crisis through the senses. He must see it, hear it, feel it, and or smell it. A man knows his house is on fire when he sees the fire. He hears the smoke alarm. He feels extreme heat, and he smells something burning. After perceiving through the senses, he knows in the mind that his house is on fire. In other words, everything in the mind originates in the senses, not the other way around. Western civilization is in a crisis right now. Western civilization is like a big, large manor estate passed down through countless generations of our family, and it is on fire. The so-called conservatives are the guys who are trying to save or conserve different things from the flames. Everybody is grabbing something different. On some level, today's conservatives know something is going horribly wrong, but with their vision obscured by ideology, they don't understand the nature of the crisis or what to conserve. Consider the late Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, the largest conservative youth group in America. "I have loyalty to ideas," proclaimed young Master Kirk. "Of course, I love the Grand Canyon, I love the Rocky Mountains, and I love Boston, and I love Chicago. But if all that disappeared and all I had was ideas, and we were on an island, that's America. America is just a placeholder for timeless ideas. And if you fall too in love with the specific place, that's just not what it is." Imagine as flames engulf your home. Flames are engulfing your house, it's burning to the ground, and your neighbor walks up to you and he says, "You know, your home is just a placeholder for timeless values. And if you fall too in love with it, that's just not what it is." If my neighbor said that to me, I would invite him to do something anatomically impossible to himself. I would not be happy. Now, this is, however, a little unfair to Charlie Kirk. No relation to Russell Kirk, mind you. The ideas Charlie Kirk has in mind, as he would later explain on other occasions, are the freedoms and rights codified in the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Charlie Kirk, like Jonah Goldberg, wants to conserve the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Now, these are both very practical documents. One is an ordinance of secession from the British Empire, and the other is a legal document, a list of laws and political compromises made back in the late 1780s. Now, this would be like prioritizing the conserving of an important lawsuit which your grandfather filed. It doesn't really tie you directly to your grandfather, even if the result of the lawsuit was some sort of financial benefit to yourself. Now consider Ben Shapiro of the Daily Wire media empire, one of the largest conservative media companies. In December of 2018, Shapiro interviewed political commentator Tucker Carlson. Carlson caused a kerfuffle by saying that certain free market innovations, such as the use of automated delivery trucks, should be restrained by government policy to conserve Middle America's way of life. "Capitalism is great," said Carlson, "but there is no Nicene Creed of capitalism. It is a tool we use to make money." The hubris of this man. Shapiro, during the ensuing kerfuffle, posted on Twitter, now X, in a since-deleted tweet, quote, "Anyone who denies the principles of capitalism is not a traditional conservative." Shapiro wants to conserve the tools of wealth getting, right? Capitalism. When the house is on fire, this brand of conservative apparently reaches for his tools and maybe some financial documents. Now let's consider Marco Rubio, the current Secretary of State. While running for president in 2015, Rubio said that young men studying philosophy would be better off focusing on welding. Technical training in welding, Rubio argued, would yield a greater monetary payoff than contemplating the cosmos. And here's the money quote. Welders make more money than philosophers, Rubio said. We need more welders and less philosophers. And I think he meant fewer philosophers. Man, maybe we need fewer politicians and more grammarians. But then again, politicians make more money than grammarians, especially these days. Now, consider what Rubio's saying here. Welders make more money than philosophers. Therefore, we need welders. We don't need philosophers. What would he save from the house that's on fire? He's saying we need to focus on one thing and neglect the other. This is like prioritizing the conservatives. This is like prioritizing the conserving of one's work tools while deliberately leaving behind to perish in the flames the things that actually tie oneself to one's heritage. The practical tools of money-making are to be saved as the family scrapbook, the family Bible, and various generational heirlooms burn. Today's supposed conservatives do not care to save anything that links us with our patrimony. Such things are impractical, and today's conservatives want to save practical things, legal documents, tools, and financial records. When they urge us to focus on ideas instead of identity, they are urging us to abandon the source of identity, meaning culture. Let culture go up in flames so long as we save our careers. This is not the conservatism of old. Every genuine conservative retains some affection for things traditional, writes Russell Kirk. And tradition is concerned principally with man's cultural world. Kirk explains that tradition joins the individual with the generations dead and generations that are yet to be born. What does a true conservative save when his home is on fire? What would you save if your home were on fire? What did Aeneas save during the burning and sacking of Troy? Remember? He tried to save his wife, he couldn't. He saved his father, his son, and the household gods. A true conservative saves his family, his parents, wife, and children. He reaches for the family scrapbook long before he even thinks about his car, his tools, his financial records, or even his wallet. The family scrapbook is filled with pictures that remind him of who he is: a son, a father, a husband, an uncle, a Christian, an American, a man. They give him his sense of identity. As Western civilization burns, how do we save Western culture? How do we save those more noble, impractical things that link us with our patrimony and give us an identity as Westerners? I say liberal education. Liberal education is akin to the family scrapbook. It passes on the perennial philosophy, sure, but it also passes on Latin and Greek, medieval architecture, Homer and Shakespeare. What else does this? What other institution conserves such precious things? Liberal education is the only thing left that provides a means of meaningful conservation. That is enough reason why conservatives must support it. There is, however, another reason that conservatives should support liberal education. It becomes apparent when we consider who set our house on fire. Who, in this analogy, set our house afire? A particular group of people called the liberals. The liberals set our house afire. Now, this may be confusing. I was just defending liberal education as a tool for conserving our identity, for saving the most precious parts of our identity from the fire. And now I'm telling you that liberals started the fire. They're burning down Western civilization. I must explain. The word liberal is said in many ways. The liberals are a group of people who denounce every part of man's true identity as an arbitrary hindrance to his ability to craft his own identity as conceived entirely in his own mind. Man, says the liberal, should not be hindered by all these things he did not choose. Therefore, man must be liberated from such things. The liberal seeks to liberate man by deconstructing and dismissing his identity. In our analogy, he's burning down our house. The liberal has been effective because he seized control of an important institution. Anybody want to guess what that institution is he's seized control of?
Education.
That's right. See one of yours? You should keep him. He's okay. The school, the place of formal education. The purpose of genuine education as understood by liberalism is precisely to liberate the mind from the crippling hold of custom and all non-rational belief, writes the conservative philosopher James Burnham in his magnum opus, The Suicide of the West. Burnham describes the liberal vision of schooling where the child, quote, the child approaches the altar of education in all his spiritual nakedness as a purely rational being shorn of color, creed, race, family, and nationality. Inherited folkways, family traditions, and religion are considered by liberalism to be superstitions that obstruct the purely rational being from crafting his own identity. Burnham's use of religious imagery with the phrase the altar of education is intentional. For the school is liberalism's church, as Burnham explains. Just as Catholics consider the Catholic Church as a means to achieving paradise in the next world, so do liberals consider the school as a means to achieving paradise in this world. Liberals, according to Burnham, do not believe there is any defect in human nature, such as original sin. Therefore, every societal problem can be fixed by way of education. Liberals believe that man is born ignorant, not wicked, writes Professor J. Salwin Shapiro in his essay, Liberalism, Its Meaning and History. And that really says it all. Liberals believe that man is born ignorant, not wicked. This means we can eliminate poverty by teaching young men how to make money via technical training. We can likewise eliminate violence via education. We can eliminate greed via education. Prisons can be converted into schools, and the police can be abolished. The liberal, in denying any inherent defect in man's nature, buys into the perfectibility of man. The means of achieving that perfectibility, heaven on earth, is formal education. This is why young liberals are more eager to go into teaching than young conservatives. Here we see yet another reason conservatives should start focusing on the academy. By recapturing the academy and restoring liberal education, we can conserve our identity and we can diminish the most powerful tool the liberals have. Liberal education is the solution to education by liberals. Liberals use schooling as a flamethrower to reignite the fire engulfing our house. If conservatives can lead some families away from these schools into liberal arts schools, they can both blunt the flame and rescue something precious from the fire. The big problem? Today's conservatives do not get it. They fail to see who started and perpetuates this fire. They would have you believe that a small group of eccentric radical intellectuals from Frankfurt, Germany, migrated to the U.S. and conspired to take over American universities, turn them into the radical institutions that we know today. That's the popular explanation given by today's conservative thinkers. Christopher Rufo, a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and advisor to Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, is one of the proponents of this Frankfurt School theory. Such elaborate conspiracy theories bear some truth for sure, but they draw attention away from the destructive nature of liberalism, which is a much larger cause of the ongoing fire. Today's so-called conservatives favor such conspiracy theories because these conservatives are accustomed to thinking ideologically, and conspiracy theories allow them to do that. A conspiracy theory is an idea held in the mind. The conspiracy theorist uses this idea to explain everything he finds in extramental reality. He cares more about the theory or idea than reality. Remember, Ramesh Ponnuru says conservatives care about ideas. They run their ideas up the flagpole and see who salutes. They care about ideas, not identity. Ideology traps man in his own head. It binds him so that he cannot see his own identity, nor can he see who is destroying it. Today's liberals are ideologues. Liberals have always been ideologues, but today's so-called conservatives are also ideologues. This is a problem for true conservatives who wish to conserve identity. The Western world is plagued with ideology, and ideology is the enemy of identity and therefore the enemy of true conservatism. Conservatism, says Russell Kirk, is the negation of ideology. Kirk is referring to the activity of conservatism. That activity entails negating or nullifying ideology. In the sea of ideology in which today's conservative finds himself, there exists one institution that actively negates ideology. It does this by introducing students to great Western thinkers who understood that everything in the mind originates in the senses, not the other way around. That institution is this is a tough crowd. Liberal education. The final reason I offer for why conservatives must support liberal education is that it cultivates a certain intellectual habit within the student. Liberal education, according to Russell Kirk, gives the student a philosophic habit of mind. Kirk borrows this term from Discourse 5 of St. John Henry Newman's The Idea of the University. Remember, the ideologue starts his thinking at the wrong end. He starts with his conclusion, his isolated idea, and he looks for things that confirm his isolated idea. By contrast, a man with the philosophic habit of mind begins his thinking by gazing at things in reality. He wonders about them, then he reasons about them, and then he arrives at a conclusion, some new knowledge. The philosophic habit of mind is rightly ordered thinking. A man whose thinking is rightly ordered will not fall into ideology. Such a man notices what Russell Kirk called the permanent things. These are enduring parts of the human condition, rooted in human nature. They include identity. A man endowed with the philosophic habit of mind knows and understands his identity. He knows when it's under attack, and he can see who is responsible. This is what I'm saying. There are three reasons conservatives must support liberal education. Liberal education conserves our identity. Liberal education undermines those who seek to destroy our identity. And liberal education lifts the ideological blinders that keep men from recognizing and defending their identity. So 3 reasons. The task of conservation in our present day necessarily entails supporting liberal education. Those conservatives who do not support it will fail to conserve our Western identity. That is to say, they will fail to conserve anything significant, no matter how many tributes they pay to some abstract idea of freedom or liberty. The words of the great Southern conservative Andrew Lytle come to mind as he writes in his memoir, "To lose your language and your God surrenders all that you are, no matter how many grand abstract words like liberty try to reassure you that you are something, or that you have something to lose." You can tell a lot about a man based on what he saves when his house is on fire. You can tell a lot about a man also by what he passes on to his posterity. Mainline conservatives intend to conserve the tools of money-making so that our posterity may achieve a comfortable material existence. they intend also to conserve nearly every legal tool that enables individuals to define their own identity. Anyone who dares restrict wealth getting or fails to adequately sacralize their abstract idea of the day is excommunicated by the doyens of Conservatism Incorporated. Mainline conservatives merely intend to conserve liberalism in an earlier, less radical incarnation. But we have seen this movie before, and we know how it ends. What begins with severing man from generations ends with severing man from genitalia. Went a little too far with that line.
No, that's great.
Went a little too far there, Jack. What begins as a project in moderate classical liberalism ends in National Review editors singing paeans to the virtue of drag queen story hour. Conservatives can reject such a future by reasserting identity. The best way to do that is to reclaim and champion liberal education. The late, great Professor John Sr. warns us that, quote, when a nation takes nothing but material success as its measure of value, it is led by the mean mediocrity which has us in its grip, stifling all initiative as we await the more effective aggression of foreign powers motivated by deeper loves and hates, who are willing to sacrifice their comforts and even their lives for what they believe. What sort of country would you die for? An economic zone? Would you give your life for a community detached from any sense of kith and kin, or detached from any sense of patrimony? And how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods? Thank you for listening.
Time for questions.
Well, that's cool.
So, I have a question.
Uh-oh.
Back during the BLM riots in Seattle and Portland and all across the country, there was a strict critique of identity politics from conservatism. And there are different sorts of identity politics. There's politics based on race, politics based on sex or gender, politics based on whether you are anti-vaxxer or vaxxer, or you accept the mRNA vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
There are all kinds of things. Whether you support, you believe in climate change, or you deny it, climate change denial, all these things. Whether you're willing to wear a mask or not wear a mask during COVID, all sorts of things. So, okay, the question I want to ask, and I want to say something else too related, is this. Is it just one set of identity politics against another set in a final analysis? And the reason I ask that is I sent you an article, I think it was in,
Glenn Lurie
yes,
and First Things.
First Things.
Yeah.
And he puts Tucker Carlson on one side, saying Carlson is defending identity politics in a sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Western identity.
Mm-hmm.
And over against that, what he wanted to put was some kind of universal claim to universal ideas or something. So I want to know how you answer the person who says, well, all you've got are sort of one set of identity politics against another, with nothing to adjudicate between them.
Well, Lurie makes some interesting points there. And he says, you have people who care about natural law, which is completely universal. And then he says you have people who care about, civilizational preservation or preserving their nations. And those are very particular things. And so he says either you're one of these nationalists who cares about particular stuff, or you're one of these natural law guys who cares about universal stuff. One of the precepts of natural law is honor thy father and mother. I mean, I think your father and mother are particular people, right? I just think it's a complete false dichotomy, and I think it's very silly. And what does he say then? He goes on to say, well, it's just impractical to try to unite a community around universalist rhetoric, and that's the weakness, he says, of the natural law crowd headed by Robbie George, because it's hard to unite a community around these universal abstract ideas. So he says the people who really strike the correct balance, I think he says, are the Jewish American community and I think the African American community. And then he has that line where he says, for certain, their histories and pasts are not equivalent. They're non-equivalent. For certain. And then he moves on. I'm kind of surprised that he would say that, because it's like, oh, really? They're not equivalent? Okay. You're treading on some very dangerous territory here, are you not? So, who suffered worse? Blacks or Jews? I mean, pray tell, Professor, who's the primary analogate in the Victim Olympics? I mean, I'm tempted to ask that. And you get in big trouble asking those questions. But he said it. It just seems to me like he's saying, you know what, some people can have nationalism and some people can't. Some people can have identity and some others can't. I think that there are some people, some crazy people, I've had the misfortune of meeting a few of them, who will protest what I'm saying by saying, you don't understand the core of our Western patrimony. You're saying that it's our faith and our philosophy. It's really some sort of genetic inheritance. That's the core of our Western inheritance. That's the core of our Western identity. Those are wicked, obnoxious people, for one thing. But I think that's just a fundamental misunderstanding. I'm saying the core of it is our faith and the inherited wisdom of the perennial philosophy. But because some people, I think, have said that it's some sort of genetic inheritance, some of these white power weirdos, there's been a reaction to that by some people on the right, perhaps an overreaction where they just say, oh, identity is something we can't care at all about. We just have to care about these abstract notions. These things that are, these abstract notions are fairly immaterial. And I think you fundamentally misunderstand man's natural order of learning. It progresses from material to immaterial. Man's natural order of learning progresses from that which is more known to man to that which is more known simpliciter, more known simply. What's more known to him, or you could say what's more known to him to what's less known to him. And the reason it progresses in this certain order is because everything in the intellect originates in the senses, not the other way around. And so the ideologue wants us to move backwards. I'm going to give you an idea, I'm going to tell you it in school, you're going to remember it, and you're going to view the world through those ideas. I think that we're just doing this all backwards, and we have to remember our natural order of learning. And it progresses from that which is material to that which is immaterial. It progresses from the senses into the intellect, not the other way around. That's why all these symbols that comprise our cultures and our identities matter. And that's why I have to just scoff at these people who say, we just have to talk about universalist stuff all day. Yep.
I was just thinking about, in terms of symbols, about two examples. One was a student back when Pope Francis was elected recommended that I read Robert Hugh Benson's Lord of the World, which was also recommended by Pope Francis. So I read it. And in that book, towards the end of the book, Rome gets bombed and St. Peter's gets destroyed, the Vatican gets destroyed. And now we're looking at a situation where Iran is sending missiles over into the holy city of Jerusalem, and there's a possibility of